Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar for today. We've got a really exciting one for you today. I am so thrilled that you're here at LSATMax's webinar for today, which is going to be all about logical fallacies, one of the most important concepts there is for logical reasoning success. And also just for your general life skills, whether you're thinking about improving your analytical skills for law school or your legal career, learning about logical fallacies is just indubitably an important skill to have. So that's what we're going to be covering today. That's what we're going to be introducing and discussing. We'll get into that in just a second. But before we do, really want to know what you all are like out there, how y'all are feeling. So I love it when these kinds of webinars are super active and engaged. So if you can, why don't you go to the chat section of this webinar? Hopefully you can pull that up. Change your recipient line from panelist to panelist and attendees so we can all see what each other are saying, and just introduce yourselves. Let us know who you are, when you plan on taking the LSAT, where you're located, and let's do kind of a corny kind of introduction icebreaker question. Logical fallacies is all about being really nitpicky in arguments. It's really about kind of being really specific with what we don't like about arguments. So let's talk about that today. So let's talk about our pet peeves. So in the chat section, let's introduce ourselves, say where we're from, when we're taking the LSAT, and discuss our pet peeves. So thank you all for chiming in. See, we have a number of people from all over. We got people from San Diego and ABQ and Chicago, Massachusetts. Canada is in the house. Welcome. We have some Oregon and New York and New Orleans and Michigan and more Vancouver and Long Island in New York. Welcome all. I'll introduce myself. My name is Ross. I'm the director of content at LSATMax. I have been teaching the LSAT for a long time, probably longer than any of you would ever even, longer than you would even wish someone spent on the LSAT. If that person was your worst enemy. I've been teaching the LSAT for almost a decade, but I love the LSAT, and I especially love helping people understand what I think to be is a very learnable test, a test that you can really start to learn and understand and improve and eventually get that score that's going to get you into the law school of your dream. I've been doing that for a long time. And one of my favorite concepts on the LSAT is the logical fallacies we're going to discuss today. I'm located in Los Angeles. I don't plan on taking the LSAT again, but maybe. And a pet peeve of mine is when people say the phrase "no worries" in response to a thank you. I don't know why. That kind of bothers me. It makes me think that they're not invested in in my gratitude. I think "no worries" is perfectly acceptable to say in response to "oh, I'm sorry about that. I bumped into you. My bad. Oh, no worries." I think that's an acceptable solution, acceptable response to that. But thank you. I don't know. It strubs me the wrong way. Looks like we got some people have some pet peeves being late. That's another one I have. People talking over you. Hopefully you don't feel like I'm talking over you right now. Let's see. Not using your turn signal. That's a great one. All right. So thank you all for being so active in the chat section. Hopefully we'll keep that up throughout this entire session. Here's what we're going to be covering in this section. The first thing I want to talk about today in this hour-long webinar is just the importance of logical fallacies, why they're so critical to your LSAT score. So we'll illustrate that, and then we'll talk about what exactly a logical fallacy is. What does it mean for an argument to be flawed? What is a logical fallacy, and how do we identify them? We're then going to cover 3 examples of common logical fallacies that appear all the time on the logical reasoning section. We'll do a couple of example questions to help illustrate how exactly those appear on the test. And then finally, we'll preserve some time at the end to discuss your questions. So if you have any questions that come up that don't pertain directly to what we're talking about right now with logical fallacies, go ahead and put the questions in the Q&A section of this webinar. So if you can see right next to that chat section, there's a little Q&A section. And if you have any questions that you would like answered at the end of this webinar, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A section. When it's time to answer those questions, I'll just be pulling from those questions in the Q&A section. If you are looking in the Q&A section, you see someone already asked the question that you want answered, go ahead and put a little, click on the little thumbs up sign. That'll let me know that several of us want to address that question, and I'll make sure to give that question the thorough answer it deserves. See that there's a question right now from Daryl. Hey, Daryl, what's up? Daryl asks, is it possible to get a copy of these slides? Unfortunately, I can't send a copy of these slides on it because it has actual written LSAT content on it. However, you can review this webinar whenever you like. You'll be sent a recording of it by email, and so you can review the slides that way if you'd like to. All right, so as I mentioned, these are our 3 topics of the day, or 3 sections of the day. Let's dig into the first one, the importance of logical fallacies. So why are we here today? Why is it so important to understand logical fallacies? Logical fallacies are really critical for the logical reasoning section of the LSAT, and the logical reasoning section of the LSAT will contribute to about 1/3 of your final LSAT score. And when you get a logical reasoning section, there's going to be various question types on that section. And what I wanted to do on this side is to kind of give you a breakdown of what the likely distribution of question types will be on your logical reasoning section. So this is typically the kind of breakdown of logical reasoning questions given a section. Now, of course, every section is different, and some sections might have more questions than what is kind of conveyed on this slide. For instance, some sections have like 5 or 6 errors in reasoning questions. Some sections have more principal questions than 2. Some of them might only have 2 must be true questions. There's some variance from test to test, but historically, this is the average breakdown you're likely to see on a logical reasoning section. Now, for how many of these questions is it important to have an understanding of the logical fallacies of the concept that we'll be talking about today? Well, 5 of these questions are going to directly ask you to identify common fallacies. Those are going to be the 4 error in reasoning questions. These are also called by some flaw questions. And there's also the question type flawed parallel reasoning questions. Those are going to ask you to identify the fallacy. So 5 of these, about 25 questions, are going to be directly about identifying the fallacy. That is the task at hand on these. Now, another 5 of these questions are going to be about fixing fallacies. These questions are going to be called strengthen questions. We have about 5 of these per exam. And much in the same way that, like, if you wanted to, I don't know, kind of like strengthen a relationship with your significant other, you want to say like, okay, what are the problems with our relationship? What are some issues that we're having? Okay, let's look at those, let's address those, and let's fix those. Arguments on the LSAT are going to be the same way. If you want to strengthen an argument, you want to take a look at that argument, find out what the problem of it is, what the fallacy that argument is committing, and then endeavor to fix that fallacy. Another 2 of these questions are going to be about worsening fallacies. These are called weakened questions. And we're going to be asked to take a fallacy and really just exploit it, make it worse. So we can see of the 25 questions on a given test, about 12 of them are going to directly involve your ability to identify and then sometimes do something with a logical fallacy. And when in the description of this webinar, it said like almost half of logical reasoning questions really directly impact your ability to understand and identify logical fallacies. These are the questions I was talking about, these 5 errors. It's 4 errors in reasoning questions, the 1 flawed parallel reasoning question, the 5 strengthening questions, and the 2 weakened questions. And trust me, this is not a inaccurate breakdown of the questions. I was just doing a project for LSATMax where I was putting together all of the question types from about 20 practice tests that involve the common fallacies. And I was able to find across those 20 practice tests, almost 500 questions that dealt with logical fallacies. So there is an enormous bank of questions that deal with these common fallacies. But these aren't the only questions that involve your ability to identify common fallacies. In fact, there are about 6 more questions. These 4 must be true questions and the 2 principal questions. And in these, incorrect answer choices, wrong answer choices often commit logical fallacies. And so it really helps to know logical fallacies to know what to avoid in the incorrect answer choices on these 6 questions. This is all to say that the majority of the logical reasoning section that you will take on your test will test your understanding of the common fallacies. So understanding the common fallacies will impact almost 1/3 of your score on the LSAT. If there's any concept on the LSAT where you can really get a bang for your buck, where if you understand this concept, you will vastly improve your ability to take the test, logical reasoning or logical fallacies is it. But this all just raises the question of, okay, I understand that it's important. What is a logical fallacy in the first place? So what is a logical fallacy? A logical fallacy is something that exists in the context of an argument. And so I know all of us might be coming to this webinar with a different amount of experience. Maybe some of us have been studying, some of us haven't studied at all for the LSAT, some of us maybe have taken philosophy or logic courses, maybe some of us haven't. So I just want to kind of take us all back to square one so we can all kind of be on the same page as each other. So since logical fallacies occur in an argument, let's talk about what an argument is. So an argument is a series of statements intended to persuade the audience to that argument. So we all make arguments all the time, but when we talk about arguments on the LSAT, what we're referring to is a series of statements, and the purpose of those statements is to persuade us of something. Now, every single argument will take evidence, also known as premises, to reach a conclusion. So those are going to be the 2 types of statements in an argument. We've got the premises, also known as an evidence, and then we have the conclusion. And that conclusion is going to be the point that we want to convince our audience of. We want our audience to be persuaded to believe that conclusions are true. Now, personally, I am a visual learner, and I know many students are visual learners as well, so I want us to visualize this when we think of arguments. This lovely, well-designed, mid-century modern table. I want us all to think of tables when we think of arguments. Because arguments have support. The premises are supporting the conclusion of the argument. So we want to think of premises as the legs of the table. They're the things that hold the table up. And a table needs legs. What would a table be without legs? It would just be like a piece of wood on the floor. It wouldn't be a table. And arguments need this support. They need the premises. Those premises add support to the argument. Now, the conclusion is going to be the thing that's supported by the premises. So the conclusion is going to be that top of the table and whatever we put on top of the table. That is the conclusion. That's the whole point of the table. Much in the same way that the conclusion is the whole point of an argument, the top of the table, the things we put on the table is the whole reason why that table exists. Now, when we think about a table, some tables are really well-built tables. They're sturdy. They're hard to knock over. They're going to support a lot of things that we put on that table. let's take the example of an argument. Let's take a look at an argument. Say I said, everyone who is attending this webinar possesses great wisdom and foresight. That is, of course, true. You're learning about the LSAT, this thing that you're going to learn how to do and eventually take. So by attending this webinar and learning about an important concept, obviously all of us attending this webinar have great wisdom and foresight. They also said that anyone with great wisdom and foresight will do extremely well on the LSAT. Therefore, everyone attending this webinar will do extremely well on the LSAT. Believe it or not, these three statements comprise an argument. I said an argument had two parts, conclusions and premises. Let me know in the chat section which part, 1, 2, or 3, is the conclusion of this argument. What's the point I'm trying to convince you all of via this argument? All right, we all got it. Number 3. Very good, very good, very good. Okay, so number 3, that is going to be the conclusion of this argument. Now, the other two parts, 1 and 2, are going to be our premises. Those are the evidence that we're using to basically add support to this argument. So 2 and 3 are adding support to that conclusion. So, excuse me, 1 and 2 are adding support to number 3, our conclusion. Now, if those premises are true, if 1 and 2 are both true statements, does the conclusion have to be true as well? Yes or no? It's true that everyone here has great wisdom and foresight, and anyone with great wisdom and foresight will do extremely well on the LSAT. Does the conclusion have to be true? I'm getting a lot of no's, and I'm a little bit confused by that. Let's think about it. Everyone attending this webinar has great wisdom and foresight. So if that statement is true, do you have great wisdom and foresight? Yeah, you do. You're attending this webinar, you have great wisdom and foresight. If I said anyone with great wisdom and foresight will do extremely well on the LSAT, will you do extremely well on the LSAT, yes or no? Yes, you will, of course. So if 1 and 2 are true, is everyone here going to do extremely well on the LSAT? Yeah. So if 1 and 2 are true, if we assume that these two statements are true, we have to also assume that 3 is true as well. This is what we would call a valid argument. And I think some of us said no initially because we were kind of thinking like, oh, I don't know if 1 and 2 are true. Those seem like kind of strong statements. That's the fun thing about arguments on the LSAT. We get to assume that the premises are true. We don't have to rely on real-world knowledge or background information to try to argue with premises. They tell us something is a premise. They give us something as evidence. We get to assume that that evidence is true. And then when we're looking at the conclusion of an argument, all we have to do is say, okay, if those premises are true, does this conclusion have to be true as well? And here, if we assume that 1 and 2 are true, we have to assume that 3 is true as well. You will all do extremely well on the LSAT. And we call this a valid argument. This is a well-built argument. It's not the kind of argument that we're going to see a lot on the LSAT. We see it sometimes, but most of the arguments on the LSAT aren't built so well. They're like missing a leg. The table's missing a leg. What's going to happen if a table is missing a leg? Are you going to be able to put stuff on that table and have that thing kind of be securely set on top of that table? No, that's just going to fall right off. This table's going to topple over. This is not a table you're going to want to use to like eat dinner on. And most arguments are like this on the LSAT. For example, I'll start with the same initial premise. Everyone who is attending this webinar possesses great wisdom and foresight. Socrates possessed great wisdom and foresight. Therefore, the ancient philosopher Socrates must be attending this webinar. Even if these premises are true, even if 1 and 2 are true, does the conclusion, number 3, have to be true as well? Yes or no? And if Socrates is here, please chime in and let me know in the chat section. Now, even if those premises are true, the conclusion does not have to be true as well. Yes, Socrates possessed great wisdom and foresight, but that doesn't mean he's here, even if everyone here has great wisdom and foresight. These sorts of arguments are invalid. They're missing premises. And we call these missing premises assumptions. Basically, this missing leg here, missing piece of information, is something we're going to call an assumption. Does anyone want to venture a guess as to what the assumption of this argument is? What's the missing premise that would actually turn this from an invalid argument into a valid argument? Anyone might have a thought about what the missing assumption. Yeah, I think Joshua hit the nail on the head. Only people attending this webinar possess great wisdom and foresight. In other words, if you possess great wisdom and foresight, you must be at this webinar. And if you're not at this webinar, then you don't possess great wisdom and foresight. Yep, that is the assumption here. Now, I know some of us might be, oh, that's okay, I kind of get that. Kind of get that that's the assumption here. Many questions on the LSAT will be testing your ability to identify these assumptions. The problem is arguments on the LSAT will be a good deal more complex than this argument here. Fortunately, there's a trick for that. There's a tool we can use. We'll get to that tool in just a second, but first I just want to clarify why it's bad to make assumptions. I talked about before that premises are ironclad. We get to assume on the LSAT that premises are true. However, assumptions can be wrong. When we assume that certain things are true, we're overlooking facts that might hurt our conclusion. For example, that last argument, I assumed that if you have great wisdom and foresight, then you must get this webinar. That might not be true. There might be a lot of people who have or had great wisdom and foresight who are not at this webinar. And of course, that's going to be a major problem. That's going to hurt the persuasiveness of our argument. Remember, the whole point of arguments is to persuade the audience to accept that our conclusions are true. When I'm making major assumptions that might not be true, that you could argue with, that you, Joshua, could quibble with, and everyone else who pointed out the assumption, that's really going to hurt how persuasive my argument is. And of course, that's going to have application on the LSAT when it's our job to figure out why certain arguments aren't very persuasive. Of course, that's also going to be something you do in law school when you're looking at case law, you're looking at decisions that judges rendered and want to consider why they're persuasive or not persuasive. And of course, it's going to help a lot when you're an attorney and you're looking at an opposing party, opposing counsel, who are making certain arguments that you might want to attack. You want to figure out why their arguments are not very persuasive. So this idea of identifying problems with arguments, assumptions with arguments, is integral to our job on the LSAT, in law school, and as an attorney. I mentioned that there's a way to spot assumptions and problems a little bit more easily. And that's where our good friend, the logical fallacies, come in. Some problems and assumptions occur so frequently in arguments that ancient philosophers decided to classify them. These problems are classified as common logical fallacies. These are problems that recur over and over and over again in bad arguments and unpersuasive arguments. And many of these common fallacies appear frequently on the LSAT. So identifying the common fallacies will help you get most logical reasoning questions correct more reliably and quickly. You're not starting from step 0. You're just like, okay, what possibly could be an issue with this argument? you're going to know, okay, I know these are the most common issues with arguments on the LSAT. So I'm going to start by looking for these specific problems in this argument. It's basically a way for you to have a little head start on the questions. Your LSAT score will depend on your ability to identify, fix, exploit, and sometimes avoid these logical fallacies. So identifying them is going to be really, really important. Let's talk about 3 of the most common logical fallacies that appear on this test and how to identify them. The first logical fallacy I want to focus on is one that occurs when the conclusion of an argument is super duper strong. And by that, when I refer to super duper strong conclusions, I'm talking about conclusions that make a statement with a lot of certainty or a lot of precision. You do want to visualize that argument as having like an anvil on top of the table. It's really strong and it's really hard to support. And we're going to need really strong legs in that table to support that. So if we're missing a leg, if there's an assumption in that argument, that table is really going to buckle quickly. So these super strong conclusions are very hard to support. Now, they frequently commit what is known as the exclusivity fallacy. Now, you don't need to know the name of that. It helps as a shorthand when you're discussing logical fallacies with an instructor or with another LSAT student, but the LSAT won't use the word exclusivity fallacy. However, you will have to be able to spot these fallacies because at least one exclusivity fallacy appears on pretty much every LSAT. In fact, most LSATs have several arguments that commit an exclusivity fallacy. The name is less important than your ability to identify this fallacy. Let's give ourselves an example of what this fallacy might look like in the context of an argument. Let's take a look at this argument. Last year, Townville received the Best City Award from City Magazine for the first time. The location of the beloved fast casual chain Habanero opened in Townville's mall last year. The opening of Habanero must be why Townville received the Best City Award. Now I know there's something I'm good at. It's creating believable fake names like Townville and Best City Award and City Magazine and Habanero. But if we're going to look at this argument, we want to start by identifying the conclusion. And Mary, we're referring to right now something called the exclusivity fallacy. Now, the name of it's far less important than our ability to identify it. Let's take a look at this argument here. We have 3 sentences, 1, 2, and 3. And again, which one is the conclusion? 1, 2, or 3? Last sentence. Good job. 3. Now, is this last sentence making a conclusion? Sorry, is this last sentence using really, really strong language when it's making its conclusion? And there's a little hint, yeah. The word must. Yeah, that's really, really strong. It has to be this reason. It is 100% certain that the reason why Townville finally received the coveted Best City Award from City Magazine is the opening of Habanero, fast casual chain. Well, what's the assumption there? Why is it a problem to say that the opening of Habanero must be why Townville received the Best City Award? Let me know in the chat section. What is the assumption being made there? When we say, yes, it's true they won the award. Yes, it's true this fast casual chain opened in the mall. Why is it a problem? I think Karen got this. We get the sense of why this is called the exclusivity fallacy, Mary. The assumption is the opening of Habanero is the exclusive reason why it received the award. And if it had not opened, it would not have received the award. Nothing else could have caused them to receive that reward. Very good, everyone. And what are the problems with assuming that? Well, there could have been other changes that led to Townville receiving the award. Yes, there was this one like restaurant that opened in the mall, but maybe there was other changes, maybe like there was better restaurants that opened. Maybe there were like a great business that started and everyone got great jobs and everyone, made a lot of money and had nicer houses. Maybe they, made the town really like ecologically friendly. Maybe there could be other reasons why town will receive the award. The other problem is like, well, Townville getting better isn't the only way they could win this award. Maybe all the other cities that won the award in the past just got worse in the last year. Sorry about that. Animated with the iPad I'm holding. So I want to talk about both assumptions and problems with this argument, because when we're doing a error in reasoning question, where we have to identify this flaw, the right answer could bring up the assumption. The argument assumes that the opening of habanero is the exclusive reason why they received the award. Or the right answer could bring up a problem. They could say the argument overlooks that there could have been other changes that led to Townville receiving the award. And the argument overlooks the fact that the cities that won the award in past years could have gone worse. But all goes back to identifying that really strong claim in the conclusion, must. And I was thinking, oh, that's a logical fallacy that indicates that this author is assuming that the opening of habanero is the exclusive reason why they received the reward. So what I want to do now is actually show how this appears in a real question. So this is a real LSAT question. Let's go over it. This LSAT question involves a pediatrician's argument. I'll read out the pediatrician's argument. Swollen tonsils give rise to breathing problems during sleep, and the surgical removal of children's swollen tonsils has been shown to alleviate sleep disturbances. So removing children's tonsils before swelling even occurs will ensure that the conclusion that the children do not experience any breathing problems during sleep. It then goes on to ask us the argument, the pediatrician's argument is most vulnerable to criticism, that it. And when it says most vulnerable to criticism, it's asking us for why it's flawed, what the fallacy is. So that's going to be the issue. So Holly Lovelace is already on the ball here. But I'm going to ask the question to everyone. Which sentence, the first sentence, or the second sentence is the conclusion? And what in that conclusion makes it very strong? What's the word in that conclusion that makes it strong? Right, the word ensure tells us that this is a very strong conclusion. This word ensure means it's a very strong conclusion. And that should get us thinking about the same problem that we were thinking about in the Townville example earlier. When we're going to make a conclusion that strong that, hey, we take out these kids' tonsils, and that's going to guarantee 100% that they'll never have any breathing problems again, we'll think about, okay, what's the assumption there? And the assumption there is that swollen tonsils is the exclusive reason why children would have breathing problems during sleep. What's the problem with that? Well, there could be other reasons why children experience breathing problems during sleep. Yes, swollen tonsils could be one, but there could be other reasons. Sleep apnea, perhaps. Congested nasal passageways, maybe. Maybe the child sleeps on their back. I actually read today that, drinking a lot of alcohol could be a reason why people snore heavily. So maybe these children are drinking a lot of alcohol, and as a result, they're snoring, have breathing problems. So yeah, maybe we take out their tonsils, but these children still have sleep apnea, or they're still drinking a lot of alcohol, or they're sleeping on their backs, or any of the other things that create breathing problems during sleep. And of course, removing swollen tonsils could create new breathing problems. Now, Holly has a question. Is it safe to say that the conclusion will always have strong language? Not necessarily. There's many other fallacies that an argument could create, like that an argument could commit. And some of those fallacies won't involve having very strong language in the conclusion. However, if you do see very strong language in the conclusion of the argument, this is the fallacy. I want you to think of that exclusivity fallacy. Oh, is the author assuming this is the exclusive reason why, this is the exclusive option available, or this is the exclusive explanation? That's what we should be thinking when we see very strong language in the conclusion. So given that this is the assumption and this is the problem, which answer choice, A, B, C, D, or E, is the one that validly expresses the problem with this argument? Very good, it's E. And notice how that impacts the problem. There could be breathing problems during sleep that might be caused by something other than swollen tonsils. Swollen tonsils is not or may not be the exclusive reason for breathing problems. And there could be other reasons why children experience breathing problems. Got a question about B. Yeah, B is super hard to read. Relies on an assumption that is tantamount to assuming that the conclusion is true. Now, the word tantamount is really confusing. It just means the same as. So relies on an assumption that's the same as assuming the conclusion is true. What this refers to is something called circular reasoning. And circular reasoning is a common logical fallacy, though it's not that common on the LSAT. A lot of times answer choices will discuss circular reasoning, but very rarely is that answer choice correct. It sometimes is, but it's pretty commonly appears in an incorrect answer choice. Now, what circular reasoning refers to is when your premise and the conclusion say more or less the same thing. It would be if this argument said something like, swollen tonsils must give rise to breathing problems during sleep because we know that swollen tonsils give rise to breathing problems during sleep. It's really just when your conclusion repeats what the premise says, and what the premise repeats what the conclusion says. And that's where it gets the word circular reasoning. The premise is a repetition of the conclusion is a repetition of the premise. So instead of persuading anyone, you're just kind of saying the same thing in a circle. And that's not the case in this argument. The premise and the conclusion are different things. It talks about having breathing problems from sleep disturbances, from swollen tonsils, and then talks about what happens once you remove those swollen tonsils. So the premise and the conclusion don't say the same thing. Hopefully that explains why B is not the correct answer. And hopefully it also illustrates why it helps to predict what the right answer is, because we don't have to worry about what this confusing B says if we know that E validly brings up a problem with this argument. All right, seems like we're all together right here. We all got this one. So I'm ready to move on, if y'all are ready, to another common fallacy. This one's going to be a little bit more complex. It's when the conclusion relies on a comparison. This is when the conclusion says something is bigger or better or safer than something else. And concluding that something is bigger, better, safer, or taller, or shorter really requires a lot of information. And arguments that rest on such comparisons rarely have all the needed facts to make such a comparison. These arguments commit what is known as a comparison fallacy. We're trying to compare apples to oranges, and we just don't have all the facts that would allow us to compare apples to oranges. Oh, we have more oranges than we have apples. Therefore, if we eat all those oranges, it's going to be more healthy than if we ate that apple. Well, I don't know. We don't have all the facts. How healthy is eating one orange? How healthy is it to eat 3 oranges? How healthy is it to eat 1 apple? Is there side effects when we eat 3 oranges? Or are there side effects when we eat just 1 apple? If I just said there are more oranges than apples, so if we eat more oranges, we'll be healthier than if we ate fewer apples, I'm not sure we have all the facts. And arguments on the LSAT will do this all of the time. Let's give an example so we can clearly see how a comparison will come into play. We'll stick with Townville. Last year, there were fewer traffic accidents on roads located in Townville than on roads located in Cityburg. Clearly, the roads are more dangerous in Cityburg than in Townville. So hopefully we can see how there's a little comparison being made. We have fewer in the premise, and we have more dangerous in the conclusion. We're basically saying the roads in Cityburg are more dangerous than there are in Townville because there are fewer accidents on Townville roads than in Cityburg roads. And that might seem to some of us like, oh, it seems like an okay argument. There's fewer accidents. Seems like the roads are more dangerous. But this, like any flawed argument, rests on an assumption. I was wondering if anyone can articulate what the assumption to this argument is. Let's try to get a little bit more specific than just not enough information. Yeah, there's not enough information here, but why isn't there enough information? Or another way we could think about it is, what is some information that we would like to know to help us make this conclusion? FW's got this. Assume that T and C have the same volume of traffic. Same amount of roads. Yeah, that's another one. We don't have any numbers. We kind of have numbers. There's fewer traffic accidents in Townville. We don't know the population of each city. That's another good point. Alice. And these are all kind of getting back to the same central idea. The main assumption that this argument makes is that it's fair to compare Townville to Cityburg. Hey, Gloria, we don't know how big the cities are. There could be major differences to Townville and Cityburg that make it unfair to compare them. And you're all bringing up those. The population of the city, the amount of the roads, the amount of traffic, roads in similar conditions, although that would kind of be relevant to the how dangerous the roads are, how big the cities are. We're all over weather differences. Great job, Sean. Yeah, these are all differences that could affect the number of traffic accidents, things that have really nothing to do with the roads. The problem is that there could be way more people or drivers in Cityburg. Yeah, of course, there's more accidents in Cityburg. There's way more people. There's way more drivers. The roads are way more congested. It's not that the roads are more dangerous. It's just that there's more drivers. Of course, there's getting more accidents. It could also be that like the cars are safer than Townville. Maybe people will drive like really nice, safe, slow-moving minivans in Townville. And that's why there aren't that many accidents. And everyone in Cityburg is driving crazy, unreliable, old cars. And that could be another problem with this. It's not the roads, it's something else. And yeah, Kat, it's also sort of an exclusivity flaw. There's some overlap between the flaws. But when the argument rests on a comparison between two things, like this argument does, a lot of times the correct answer to like an errors in reasoning question will reference the problems with that comparison. Here, the right answer might say, hey, the author assumes or takes for granted that it's fair to compare the Townville and Cityburg, or that the author overlooks that there may be more drivers in Cityburg, or the author overlooks that cars can be generally safer in Townville. Let's see how it appears on a real test, a real question. This is another errors in reasoning question. This one is about Moore's argument. And Moore says sunscreen lotions, which are designed to block skin cancer causing ultraviolet radiation, do not do so effectively. Many scientific studies have shown that people who have consistently used these lotions develop, on average, as many skin cancers as those who have rarely, if ever, used them. Again, we have two sentences here. Sentence one, sentence two. Which one is the conclusion, one or two? Yeah, one is the conclusion here. Basically, sunscreen does not work. And why does it not work? Well, they cite studies. And these studies have shown that people who use sunscreen all the time develop skin cancer more frequently than people who don't use sunscreen. Is that premise, is this argument resting on a comparison between two things? Are we comparing things in this argument? Absolutely. What are we comparing? What are the apples and oranges in this argument? People who consistently use sunscreen lotions and people who rarely, if ever, use them. So what's the assumption there? The assumption is very similar to the assumption in the last one. It is fair to compare people who use sunscreen often and those who use sunscreen rarely. Why might it not be fair to compare people who use sunscreen often and people who use sunscreen rarely? Yeah. People who use sunscreen often may be the most likely to develop skin cancer. Maybe they know they have a genetic predisposition to skin cancer, so they're really safe and they use it a lot. Maybe they're people who have jobs or lifestyles that require them to be outside all the time. Like I'm a dork. I stay inside all the time, all the day. Just doing the LSAT. I don't put on sunscreen. I'm probably pretty safe from skin cancer. If I was, working at a construction site, I think things would be very different. If I didn't wear any sunscreen in that case, I would be very likely to get skin cancer. But if I wore sunscreen more often, maybe I would still be more likely to get skin cancer than I am now, being an inside person, but I would still be less likely to develop skin cancer if I didn't wear any sunscreen at all. Another problem is that though people who use sunscreen often may have even higher rates of skin cancer if they used it rarely. So knowing that this is the assumption, and these are the problems with that assumption, which answer choice is correct? A, B, C, D, or E? Once again, we're going with E, and that is correct. Overlooks the possibility that people who consistently use sunscreen lotion spend more time in the sun on average than people who don't. And that explains one reason why it may not be fair to compare these people. Okay, people who use it the most might spend more time in the sun. That would be the people most likely to get it. Maybe it still helps them, but they just have a higher risk lifestyle than those who never have, those who never wear sunscreen. The question about D, it relies on evidence regarding the probability of people in different groups developing cancer that in principle would be impossible to challenge. So this is just saying that it would be impossible to kind of check this evidence. It'd be impossible to say that people who use sunscreen lotions consistently develop cancer more often than people who don't use sunscreen often. And one problem with D is that it's not impossible to challenge this premise. We could open up the studies and see, okay, who do we compare? Okay, these are the two groups. How many incidences of skin cancer did group A have? How many incidences of skin cancer did group B have? Does group A have more incidence of skin cancer than group B? Okay, we could check the numbers here. It's certainly not impossible to challenge this premise. A more general reason why D is incorrect is what it's doing is it's challenging a premise to an argument. It's challenging the studies. And remember, our premises in our arguments are ironclad. We get to assume that those are true. Answer choices that try to challenge premises, at least on these errors and reasoning questions, those aren't going to be correct. Remember, we're focusing on the missing information, the assumption, the fallacy, the problems, not problems with the premises. Okay, we'll already move on to our third and final common fallacy. I think we all got it. Let's try one last. This last fallacy is going to occur when the conclusion introduces new ideas. This can be subtle, this can be tricky. But often arguments will introduce new concepts or ideas in the conclusion. we'll just start talking about new stuff in the conclusion. And these arguments are assuming that these concepts or ideas in the conclusion are the same as those discussed in the premises. There's no difference between the stuff discussed in the premises and the new stuff discussed in the conclusion. These arguments commit what is known as an equivocation fallacy. Again, knowing that word is less important than your ability to spot these fallacies when they occur. Let's take a look at this in action. A recent poll of all Townville residents shows that 85% of registered Townville voters are not disappointed with the newly elected mayor's first term. Obviously, then, most of Townville's voters are thrilled with the new mayor's performance. What's the assumption in this argument? Let me know in the chat section. What does this author assume to be true when making this argument? And Kat's got it. Mariah's got it. Yeah, a lot of us are really getting to the heart of it. The name of this fallacy, again, was the equivocation fallacy. So yeah, the assumption is being not disappointed in a mayor's performance is the same as being thrilled with the mayor's performance. Are those two things the same? If they're not, we can identify some problems. Why might not being disappointed be different from being thrilled? In other words, what's the problem with making this assumption? You could not care. You could be ambivalent. You could be neutral. Many of those who are not disappointed could be neutral or ambivalent about the mayor's performance. Another reason that they're not the same. Many of those who are not disappointed could have low expectations to begin with. Not disappointed is kind of a relative term. Not disappointed is going to depend on what your expectations were in the first point. If you're expecting to be thrilled with the mayor's performance and you're not disappointed, then yeah, you'll be thrilled with the mayor's performance. But if you're expecting the mayor to do a terrible job and you are not disappointed, that could be that the mayor did a terrible job, did not disappoint your expectations. Yeah, and so us can see this in real world analogs. So these are two different ideas that the author just tries to assume are the same. This happens on the LSAT too. So I want y'all to look at this argument. This one's a little bit more difficult than the last two that we did. Look at this argument and try to identify what the confusion is here. What are the two ideas that this employee assumes are the same? And let me know what those two ideas are in the chat section. Yeah, Mariah figured it out. Good job. Same with Joshua and Paula. This one's kind of an interesting conclusion. Clearly my boss is incorrect. He's going to pull in what the boss said as part of the conclusion. So the boss's statements, what happened here? So I had a little screen sharing mishap. Go ahead and fix that. Right. Okay. Okay, let's go with this. Okay. Sorry about this, everyone. Okay. Let's show this right now. So the idea here is that the problem is that the author is collapsing two different ideas. It's collapsing the idea of too much detail and having more details. Okay, just one sec while I fix this. Yeah, so as I was discussing, this conclusion, which talks about the boss being incorrect, is going to bring in the boss's statement. So the boss's statement is that they should have had more detail. So what this author is essentially saying is that, hey, we didn't need to include more detail. And the premise is that when you have too much detail, people's attention wander. But those are two different ideas, as many of you identified. It's possible to include more detail without including too much detail. And that's the assumption, that including more details is the same as including too much detail. But the problem with that is that they could have included more details without getting to that extreme of too much detail. And based on that, the correct answer is going to be B. But the author fails to distinguish between more of something, in this case details, and too much of that, in this case details. And I just got your joke, Joshua. Great callback, great job. Are we all understanding this last fallacy, the exclusivity fallacy? And how comfortable do we feel with these fallacies? Are we understanding both what these fallacies are and how we might identify them for future questions? Feeling good? Yeah, I'll just write out all three right now. We got the first one, which is called the exclusivity. That's when we had strong conclusions. Second one was comparison. That's when the argument rests on a comparison. This last one is called the equivocation. That's when we see new info in the conclusion. And those are going to be three very common fallacies. And the examples I chose for you today, and in the kind of fake arguments I wrote about Townville today, I tried to make it pretty easy, or at least relatively easy, to spot these conclusions, to spot these problems. Arguments are going to get a good deal more complex than this on the LSAT. But it all comes back to noticing the same things. Noticing really strong conclusions, no matter how complex the argument is or how difficult the question is going to help you spot the exclusivity fallacy, which is going to help you on many LSAT questions that commit the exclusivity fallacy. Noticing when arguments rest on comparisons, no matter how difficult or complex those arguments are, we're going to help you spot the comparison fallacies on all the questions that commit logical fallacies. And noticing new info on arguments in the conclusion is going to help you identify the equivocation fallacy, which is a very common fallacy on the test, especially on some of the most feared question types in logical reasoning, like the sufficient assumption and necessary assumption. They commit these kinds of equivocation fallacies all the time. So even when it gets more difficult from the examples I chose for today, we will be able to rely on these same tools, noticing the same things in the argument to help us spot these fallacies. And that is a really crucial skill. And it's a skill you're going to want to practice a lot. So if you'll indulge me a second, I want to talk about how LSATMax can help you build this skill that's going to be so crucial for nearly a third of your final LSAT score. Now, the great thing about LSATMax is the amount of content that you will have at your disposal. You will be given, whether you take the LSATMax 60 course or 80 course or the 365 course, it'll give you a full year of access to the LSATMax app. You'll be given all of the prep tests. So you'll be able to see every single example of these fallacies that have ever appeared on the LSAT. And there's about 90 practice tests that have been released. I just looked at 20 of them for a recent project I was doing, and I found over 500 examples of common fallacies. So you can get all of the practice you could possibly need identifying the common fallacies with the access to those practice exams. You'll also have through the course lesson videos that describe even more of the common fallacies than we went over today. You'll have written explanations for all of these questions that entail common fallacies that will explain how you could have identified that common fallacy. We also hold regular office hours every single day, and many of them will deal with question types that revolve around your ability to identify common fallacies. You also have analytics on the types of questions that involve the common fallacy, so you can review those. So all of these things are wrapped into the course. Then not only, of course, we'll go over common fallacies and the questions that involve those, but all the other parts of the LSAT as well. You'll just have so much content at your disposal to review these common fallacies, to practice identifying them, both in individual questions and on full practice. Another cool thing that you get with the course is the textbook of 33 common LSAT flaws. And this is available on Amazon. If you just want to buy just the course book and not do the course, you can get it on Amazon. But if you buy the full course, you will get access to this book as well. And this book covers 33 specific logical reasoning fallacies that comprise 12 flaw families. So basically, this is going to go over every common fallacy that is going to be committed on this test. Went over 3 of them. There's 30 more that will be covered on this book, and Katie just dropped a link in the chat section. This will also include concise and actionable introductions to all 12 families of flaws. You'll be given tools to help you identify all 33 of those LSAT flaws. You'll be given real examples of flaws in LSAT questions. So every single logical reasoning family will have several questions that show that fallacy in an argument. And with each of those questions that appear in this book, there'll be thorough explanations. And those explanations will help you understand what that question type was, whether the stimulus was an argument or a set of facts, what that argument meant, how to anticipate the correct answer, how to anticipate the correct fallacy, and how to explain the correct and incorrect answer choices. All of those are crucial to being able to master questions. It's concept of logical reasoning families, which again impacts over half of your logical reasoning score. So this book is available on Amazon if you want to purchase the book on its own. If instead you want to buy the full course, the book will be included in that. Now that's going to do it today for what we have to go over for fallacies. I want to thank you all for hanging out. Oh, another thing I should bring up is tutoring. If you want to work one-on-one with a tutor to help you with the fallacies or any other concept on the LSAT, you'll be able to do that. Pricing and information is on our website. I encourage you to check that out. testmassprep.com/LSAT/tutoring. Again, the promo code for 15% off or 10% will work for that. And we'll answer the questions. I will go ahead and put some testimonials on the board so you can see what some happy veterans of the LSATMax program have to say. So got a few questions in the Q&A section. I'm going to pull that up and answer the questions. Okay. One question was, how do we access this webinar if we have the course? A recording of this webinar will be emailed to you whether you have the course or not. So you'll be able to review this webinar at that point. Another anonymous question, an anonymous attendee asked, pretty much every question I get wrong in the LR section is flawed, no matter what the question type. This is what I need to be focusing on then. And I would say, yeah, that's no surprise because most arguments in logical reasoning are flawed arguments. And there's a number of question types that involve flawed arguments. We went over errors of reasoning questions, strengthening questions, weakening questions, flawed parallel reasoning questions. Some other questions, evaluation questions have flawed. So those are the question types you're getting wrong. I would say having a better understanding of the logical fallacies is something you should be focusing on then. Now, to just kind of discuss some experience I've had working with many students on logical fallacies, it's my experience that too many people, when studying logical reasoning families, focus on the name of the fallacies, when the far more important skill is being able to identify that fallacy. So when you're reviewing fallacies, try to learn some of the clues that help you identify those common fallacies that we talked about for the three today. For the exclusivity fallacy, we're focused on really strong language at the conclusion. For the comparison fallacy, we're looking for comparisons being made in the argument. And for the equivocation fallacy, we're looking for new ideas showing up in the conclusion. There's, of course, 30 other fallacies. I think reviewing the book, 33 Common Fallacies in the course can help you learn what to look out for to spot these fallacies. And that's really what I'd be focusing on to help you be able to be more reliable in identifying these fallacies on whatever the question type may be. Another anonymous attendee asked if the course includes official LSAT questions with explanations. Yep, you get every released LSAT question through the 90 prep tests, plus all of the questions that get used for the homework as part of the course. And those will all have thorough, in-depth explanations. If you have the course anonymous, you can access the book through the errors in reasoning section of the study part of your exam, or sorry, the study part of your course. So I can even pull that up, what that looks like. So I'm going to pull up my account right now. So here's the LSATMax app with its new user interface. In the study portion of the account, you'll scroll down to errors in reasoning. It's on day 19. Pull that up, and then you can see 33 common LSAT flaws. You'll have the full text of that book, every flaw being discussed. So you'll be able to get that access there, or you can buy the book on its own, whatever you'd like to do. Yep, actual tests are included in the course, Brenda. All tests, and you can take them as many times as you want. Another question, what's the difference between a comparison fallacy and a correlation causation fallacy? So comparison fallacies is, well, comparison fallacy could mean a number of things, but generally it's when we compare two things, especially saying something is bigger than something else, or better than something else, or safer than something else, when we don't have all of the facts. Specifically, we don't have the facts that would allow us to conclude that these two things that we're comparing are actually comparable. That's actually fair to compare those two things. Correlation and causation occurs when we say, like, okay, these two things occur very frequently together. They're associated with one another. Therefore, one must cause the other. So the comparison is when we're taking two things and kind of weighing them, making a judgment between them. Whereas a correlation and causation is when we say there's a specific cause and effect relationship between two things based on the fact that they're correlated or associated with one another. And again, more information about that will be in the course and in the book. I encourage you to check both of those out. Cool. All right, looks like those are all the questions for today. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about fallacies. Hopefully you'll take that and expand upon that, because again, I can't emphasize how important these fallacies are for LSAT success. Wish you the best of luck with your studies. Again, look out for that promo code being emailed to you. Hope to see you again in our office hours at our course. Best of luck with your studies. Enjoy the rest of your week. I had a lot of fun today. Take care, everyone.